Next, let us look at the UI wireframe of the example that we will be implementing. Imagine that this is the entire browser, and imagine that this is the browser address bar where we can see the URL, and at the top we have three links: home, about, and users. The URL slash corresponds to the home link, and when the home link is selected, we need to show the home component, which only has text home as its content. The URL slash about should correspond to the about link, and clicking on the about link should load the about component, which just has text about within it, and the URL slash users should correspond to the users link, and clicking on that link should load the users component, which just has some text users within it. And so clicking on the home link should change the URL to slash and should load the home component. Clicking on the about link should change the URL to slash about and should load the about component, and clicking on the users link should change the URL to slash users and should load the users component. So let's implement that. Let's start by creating the components for home, about, and users. So I'm going to select the router_examples folder, and I'm going to add a new file called home.js. It is going to be a function component and it has to return some JSX. So let me write the return statement, and let me specify a root div, and let me add some content to it, and I'll just add home text within h2 tags as the content. Let's export this component, export default home. Let's also create the about and users components similarly. So I'm going to add another file called about.js, and that is also going to be a function component and it has to return some JSX. So I'm going to write the return statement, and I'll specify a root div, and I'll specify some content within it like this, and I'll export this component also, export default about, and let me add the users component similarly. So I'm going to add a file called users.js, and that is going to be a function component as well. So let's write function users, and we have to add the return statement so that we can return some JSX. Let me specify a root div, and let me add some content to it like this, and I'll export this component also as export default users. So now we can import these three components into app.js and use them. So let's do that. So I'm going to open app.js, and within app.js I'm going to remove this header section so that we are only left with the outer root div. Let me save the file. I'll import these three components that we created just now. So I'm going to type import home from, and I'm going to specify the relative path like this, home. I'll do the same for the about component as well, import about from, and I'll specify the relative path like this, and let me do the same for the users component also, import users from, and let me specify the relative path like this. And to start with, what we want is we want three links at the top, and these links should not be the normal anchor tag links that we usually use. We need to use the link component that React Router gives us. So let's import that from React Router. So I'm going to type import link from React Router DOM like this. And not just the link component, we'll need a few more components from React Router DOM. So let's import them also. We'll need the browser router, and we'll also need the switch component, and we'll also need the route component. So let's import all of them from React Router DOM. And the usual convention is to import the browser router as router. So when we need to use browser router, we'll use the alias router. Since we have imported the link component, we can use that to create these three links. So let's do that. The link component, the switch component, and the route component, all of these have to be used within browser router. So we'll have to specify the browser router component as the parent component for all of them. So I'm going to type router because that is the alias for browser router, and we'll use the other components within this router component. Let's place all of these links within a nav tag. So I'm going to include a parent div tag, and within that I'll place a nav tag, and I'll specify an unordered list, and each link will be a list item. The first link is home, so I'm going to type link, and we'll specify the path using the to attribute, which is slash, and the text is home. And similarly, the second link is about, so let's add that. So I'm going to write link to equals slash about, and the text is about. Let's close the link. Similarly, let us add a third list item, and the third link is for users. So let's add that. So I'm going to type link to equals slash users, and I'm going to type users as the text. Let's close the link. Make sure you have the development server started. If not, type npm space start and start the development server. And if you look at the output, we can see that we have 3 links. Let's add some CSS to these list items. So I'm going to open app.css and I'll add the CSS over here. What we want to do here is we want the list items to behave like inline blocks so that they can appear one beside the other, and we want to have some space between each of those list items. So let me save that and go back to our page. You can see that the list items are appearing beside each other and there is some space between each of the list items. Now we have to add code to make each of these links work. At the moment, what is happening is if you click on the links, the URL is changing correctly. For example, if I click on the about link, we can see /about in the URL. If I click on the users link, we can see /users in the URL. And if I click on the home link, we can see that the URL changes to the root URL. But what we want is, in addition to the URL changing correctly, we want the corresponding components to be loaded also. And for that, we have to use the switch and route components. So let's do that. So we have added our navigation links, and now we have to write code to load the actual components that correspond to those links. So I'm going to write load correct component depending on URL. And here we have to use the switch component, and within the switch component, we have to specify the routes. So let's do that. So I'm going to type route path equals /about, and when this is the path, we want to load the about component. So let's specify the about component within the route like this. Let's close the route. So let's examine this code one more time. What we are saying here essentially is that when the URL's path matches /about, we want to render the about component. Let's do the same for the users component. So I'm going to type route again, and if the path is /users, we want to render the users component, and let's close the route. So when the path is /about, we want to render the about component, which is about.js over here. And when the path is /users, we want to render the users component, which is users.js over here. And when the path is just /, that means the root URL, then we want to render the home component. Let's close the route. So if the path is just /, that means the root URL, we want to render the home component, which is home.js over here. Let's save the file and let us look at the output. While examining the output in these examples, we have to keep an eye on the URL in the browser address bar, and we also have to keep an eye on the content that is displayed over here. So currently in the browser address bar, we have the root URL, which corresponds to /, and so out of these 3 routes, this route will match because the path is /, and so the home component will be rendered, whose JSX is this, which is what we are seeing over here. Let's click on the about link now, and let's see what happens. Let's keep an eye on the URL in the browser address bar, and also keep an eye on the text over here. So I'm going to click on about now, and you can see that the URL has changed to /about over here, and the content has changed to the text about over here. Let us next click on the users link and see what happens. So I'm going to click on users link now, and the URL has changed to /users, and the content has changed to users as well, which is what we specified in the JSX for the users component and previously for the about component as well. So our first example with React Router seems to be working. The next point we have to discuss is about the root URL. What I have done here is I have specified the home link as the first link over here, just like it was in the UI wireframe. But when I specified the routes, what I did was I specified the route corresponding to the home component at the end. This is because this path / over here will match /users and /about also. So if this route was specified before these 2 routes, then what will happen is this route will end up matching every URL of our spa application. Let's see that problem in action. So I'm going to cut this code here, and I'm going to place it here so that we have the root URL and the home component at the top now. And let's look at the output and see what happens. So I'm going to click on about now, and you can see that the URL has changed to /about over here, but the content over here hasn't changed. Let's do the same for users. I'm going to click on users link now, and we can see that the URL has changed to /users, but we are seeing the content for the home component. And that is because /about and /users matches the path in this route over here, which is /. So to deal with this problem, we either have to place this route at the end after all other routes in our single page application, or we can add the exact attribute to the route. When we add the exact attribute like this, it will mean that we want the home component to be rendered only if the path over here matches completely. That means the path in the URL has to be exactly /. Only then will the home component be rendered now. Let's look at the output now. I'm going to click on the about component, and you can see that the URL has changed to /about and the about component has been rendered. I'll click on the users link now, and you can see that the URL has changed to /users and the users component has been rendered here. So we have fixed our route for the root URL now by using the exact attribute.